the question that I have that needs to be answered is, can you predict who's going to win the Super Bowl based upon the square footage of the home that the quarterback owns?
Okay.
Okay, I did not sleep much on Thursday night as I went down this rabbit hole of figuring all of this out and Zillow.
Okay.
But I'm going to take you back a couple of games. Okay, so first of all, here's the easy one. If we go back to last year, Super Bowl 58, we got Mahomes versus Purdy.
Yeah.
Mahomes has at this point completed his mega mansion, which is gorgeous, by the way. I took many photos and look-throughs and videos that I watched. I mean, he's got a football field and a soccer field in the back, a 3-hole par 3 golf course. It's crazy. But okay, do you know where Purdy was living and the square footage he had?
No.
You didn't see. Okay, he was renting an apartment in San Francisco with one of the offensive linemen.
Okay.
Okay, so I've got Mahomes' square footage last year for Super Bowl 58 at 12,800, and I got Purdy at near zero.
Okay.
I mean, maybe we could give him 300 feet. We know the outcome of that Super Bowl.
Yes.
Mahomes wins.
Yes.
12,800 square feet. Okay. The previous year, Super Bowl 57, which was a rematch. We've got Mahomes versus Hurts. At that time, Mahomes had not sold his previous home. So he actually was owned 17,000 square feet. Mm-hmm. And Hurts was at roughly 12,350 based upon two mansions that he had purchased in Texas that he lives in during part of the off season. Okay, who won that one?
I believe it was the Chiefs. They beat the Eagles.
They did, and so Mahomes again.
I had to think for a minute.
Mahomes again with the square footage edge, also winning that Super Bowl.
Okay.
Now I'm going to take you back a game before. I went back 5 years on this to see if this had some legs to it. And we got Stafford, who at the time, Matt Stafford with the Rams, living in 17,129 square feet.
Yeah.
Versus Burrow at 2,900 square feet, or more modest.
Okay.
Rams wins that game.
Yeah, the Rams beat the Bengals. Yeah.
Square footage of quarterback is winning again.
Okay.
Okay, so then I go back to Super Bowl 55. We got Brady and Mahomes. Okay, Mahomes at this point was living or owned 13,000 square feet. Okay. Brady, however, had completed the renovation on a mega mansion and owned 30,000 square feet. I know it's hard to remember when Mahomes had lost.
Yeah.
But
that's when Brady won with Tampa.
Brady won with Tampa, and he had the square footage advantage.
Ooh.
And then I go back before Super Bowl 54, we got Mahomes and Garoppolo. Mahomes at that time had not built the mega mansion, but owned 6,100 square feet, and you had Garoppolo at only a modest 1,148 square feet, and the Chiefs get the 49ers 31-20. The square footage of the quarterback represents who's going to win the Super Bowl.
So whoever has a bigger house.
Okay, so here's what I have going on right now before next week. I've got Mahomes at roughly 12,800 square feet because he was at 17, but he sold the previous homes from the public records that I could find. And then I've got the combination of Hurts. He's got two Texas mansions, side by side mansions. They're big. I mean, 6,000 square feet, another 4. Now, then he has another home in Texas. So that's roughly 10,000 square feet that he had purchased, but he has since transferred that to his brother's name.
Okay.
12,350 puts him 500 square feet short of beating Mahomes in the Super Bowl.
Oh, so it's going to be a Kansas City repeat.
If I was Hurts, I would go out this week and I would purchase and close on another house on that same block with his mansions. And that would be the biggest predictor of winning the Super Bowl next week. So I call it what you want, a rabbit hole, McKay, but it's in the stats. And so I mean he didn't buy big enough. We're going to see if this holds for the 6th year in a row, but he does not have the square footage.
Ooh.
That's
somewhere out there. There's some guy going, I got to get a hold of my bookie.
Or his realtor.
Yeah.
I mean, there we go. So that's Lance Kenmore's real estate take on the Super Bowl, and I'm calling it right now based on square footage. Chiefs 3-peat.
Throw down the rope ladder. We're ready to climb out of the rabbit hole.
Okay, we're ready to climb out the rabbit hole. We better get back to a little bit more of serious real estate talk.
That was good.
Okay, I like I told you, I didn't sleep much Thursday night. I started down TikTok, Zillow, tours. It was bad. But here we go. So back to a little bit of housing reality. I follow certain economists, and when they really present things in a good way, I think it's important to bring that to the listeners and talk about it. And I got to tell you, I'm always talking about housing affordability, and people probably get a little sick of me talking about it. But right now, it's just such a massive issue. And here's the exact numbers as the economists start to crunch this. So I look at median home prices across the U.S. and then median income. Okay, so in 2024, the income needed to buy a median priced home. So across the U.S., a median priced home is $429,000.
Okay.
To not spend more than 30% of your income on housing, which is kind of the metric that they use in the industry, your median income would need to be $116,000.
Okay.
That is not what the median income in the U.S. is. Okay, so when you look at that, a buyer with the median income, which is $83,000, would have to spend 41% of their income on housing.
Oof.
So the median income is not in line with the median price of housing right now. That's why we're talking about this so often. So if you look at that, it's a slight improvement. It was 42.2% in 2023, but 2024 ended up ranking as the second least affordable home buying year on record ever that they're talking about. So just to give you a comparison, between 2013 and 2019, it averaged 29.1% versus 42% of your income. So that's why we talk about it here on the show, and that's why we go over some of these things, because it's just the median house price is out of whack with what the median income is. And so you're going to hear us talk about housing solutions for that. You're going to hear us talk about the condos, the townhouses, the 3D printing, finding these solutions to drive back to some sense of affordable housing in those situations. The other big story to note last week is we saw the Fed hold interest rates. So we had some cuts previously. There was a lot of talk, and actually very publicly, Trump came out and said that he wanted bigger interest rate cuts. Powell said publicly, I might be paraphrasing a little bit, but Powell said, I don't listen to Trump. I was appointed by him, but I don't listen to him. And he actually even said something to the effect of that it would be inappropriate for him to comment on that. So like we talked about, we predicted you would have pressure from the administration wanting rates down. But the numbers in the economy that they looked at, the employment numbers, inflation was slightly higher than they target that they still want. I think 2% is the target. It was running at 2.8. So they said, hey, we can't cut rates at this meeting. And they indicated going into the rest of 2025, I think we're going to see rates be in a narrow band from that 6.25 to 6.75. Right now, they've softened a little bit. It seems like the bond market and what's going on, they like what they're seeing right now. And we actually saw 30-year rates in the last week come off of those 6.8 numbers, and I saw rates at 6.5 on a 30 this year, and then I even saw a 5.625 on a 15-year. So they calmed down a little bit, and that affordability factor for buyers right now, it looks like it's getting better right before our spring market starts. So I really, really like to see that. I've been doing a lot of work lately on getting the word out on, what challenges sellers are facing. And we put out some new ads about that in the last week or two. And with that, one of those big things that we talk about in that is adapting to a market with interest rates at 6.5%. And then pricing accordingly in a market that has not been appreciating, 10 and 12%. And so one of the biggest frustrations when we sit down and talk with sellers and meet with sellers that they're facing and seeing is coming to terms with the fact that we're not in a market like that was appreciating 12%. And when that happened for, 3, in some places 4 years in a row, it's very easy to assume that's still the case. And when you really look at the data, it's not. So when you look at pricing of what happened last year in our local market, you got to look and see, am I going to go into that band of a sellable price? And what does that mean? And honestly, that is one of the biggest frustrations that we have as sellers right now. And so you've got to look at that. And there's a couple tips I wrote down for that today for them to help with that. And the first one that always comes into play, and I had probably 8 conversations with different sellers about this in the last week and a half, and that is just taking a very realistic look at comparable properties. And by comparable properties, I'm talking about some simple rules. Can you find a house that's within a half mile to a mile of your current home that is sold? Mm-hmm. Can you find a sale that was listed and closed in the last 3 months? Roughly the same age and size of your property? Is square footage within 10% of what your square footage is? Those are like the basics, like the poster child comps. Now, and I agree, some areas are not as easy as other areas. Like if we go to West Pasco and we go out there to Road 68 and Road 100, we can find a house like yours 7 houses down. Mm-hmm. Where we have big tract neighborhoods that were built out with similar floor plans. Those we can price closer to that band. Where it gets a little more difficult and you've really got to consult with your agent is if now we get into a more custom neighborhood. Mm-hmm. There is a comp for that house. We are trained to have comps for that house. We are also trained to have hard conversations about what actually is a comp. Yeah. Because a buyer will have choices in your price range. And so what you're traditionally thinking of as a comp might not be a direct comp, but you have to consider it when pricing and stay away from aspirational pricing. And so the second big item after comparables that I wrote down on this list is that you can learn from other listings' mistakes. So a great tool is to go, if you're thinking about pricing a property higher than you think was suggested to you or that an expert talked to you about, look at other listings and the history of those and what happened to them. Maybe they hit the market when you first saw it at $475,000, but then they did 3 price cuts down to $425 and ended up closing at $415. Just because that was the original price you saw on the flyer doesn't mean that's exactly where they ended up. The other thing to look out is what listings expired in my neighborhood. Why didn't something sell? And then go and do a deep dive into that and use that to help you to avoid those mistakes that another seller might have made. Third thing that I wrote down to be careful about is don't go for an asking price that lumps you in with all of the competition. So one of the things that buyers will do is they'll see value based upon a band that something's priced at. So for instance, if you're going into a new construction neighborhood,
all right,
and that's relatively the same, that have been built, homes that have been built in the last 5 years, and there's 4 comparables, and they're all priced at 405 with similar amenities. If you go in at that exact same 405, you're going to be lumping yourself right in with the competition. Where if you were to go at the 399 mark or the 400 mark, you're going to put yourself in a different band that people are looking at and not be ignored when the other ones are shown. And if you are shown with the other ones, you're going to truly show that you have the best value with the same features and benefits.
Because they're going to say, well, how come this one is a few $1,000s cheaper? It piques their interest.
That's exactly right. And they're going to want to see it. So you're probably going to get increased number of showings in that situation. The other thing to look out for that I put down in this situation is to avoid what I call obscure pricing. So by obscure pricing, in that example that I just gave you, 405 is a tough number to be at. Like I understand why someone might need to be there if you look at the comparables and it shows. But one of the things you're doing is you're completely missing search history from 350 to 400. It's very, very common for people to search in $50,000 or $25,000 increments. And if they're searching right up to 400 or they're searching right up to 399, 900, and you're at 405, you're getting zero exposure to those other buyers. And so just be careful about some of those big price points and who's with you in those price points when you're doing that. The next thing that I wrote down on this list is, and this is a hard one. In fact, this is really hard for people. And that is I put down, put yourself in the buyer's shoes. We talk a lot on our team about perception versus perspective. And you might have a perception about your house, but another buyer's going to have a different perception about that, and they're going to have perspective on it. And so to get people out of perception, one of the things that I have to do sometimes, if people cannot put themselves in the buyer's shoes, I'll just load them up in my car and say, okay, you're a seller, but you're going to spend 2 hours with me as a buyer, and we're going to, before we come up with the listing price on your house, if we can't agree, we're going to go look at three other homes, and we're just going to be a buyer. Like, I'm just going to put you in the car, and I'm going to show you the other 3 homes. I'm going to show them when I also show your house. And so it's really, really interesting when you do that and you go through that. A lot of times people will be like, they'll come back and they'll be like, okay, I had no idea. You know, they just live in their house every day, right? Like, it's hard to know, or they look at things on Instagram and things look perfect on Instagram, and they might not be perfect when you go to them in real life. So put yourself in the buyer's shoes, know what they're looking at, know what they're going to see, and then price accordingly in that situation. The other thing that I wrote down was, don't hesitate to cut the price after listing. Okay. And there's some rules that go along with this. Like, I have a certain number of showings in a certain amount of days, and then there's a percentage of what that means the market is telling us. And so you've got to evaluate and look at that, especially at about that 30-day mark. You want to go over and see, have we had 10 showings? Yeah. If we haven't had 10 showings, why not? Did the market change dramatically? Did rates change dramatically? What else was sold during this time period that we need to be looking at? And so if that's the case, we won't make a hesitation to make a price adjustment to get the house sold. So that's a big one also that we're talking about with people. And then lastly, I just have down evaluating your price point not compared to what the market is or what the national is, but your specific price point. Where are homes selling in that price point? Because a lot of times people will be like, hey, the real estate market's, great. We just had the highest median price that we've had. Mm-hmm. However, we also had the slowest amount of sales across the nation, that we've ever had in the last 30 years. And so when we look at that, we say, okay, if we're pricing a home at $450, now we need to get granular a little bit and say, okay, homes that are priced from $425 to $475, how are they selling?
Yeah.
What are those homes priced at? What are the number of days on the market for that price point? And then looking specifically at what we're doing for your individual property.
Yeah.
Is it a buyer's market? Is it a seller's market in that situation? What are we dealing with? And so we just make sure that we're presenting all of that information, getting it in front of a seller, and then doing what I call very, very tight pricing band to get properties sold right now in this market. So that's what I'm working with. Those are the biggest questions that we've been talking to sellers about over the course of the last week. And as we saw at the top of the break,
yes,
square footage of the quarterback predicting this year's Super Bowl winner.
Oh, I'm left-handed.
I'm ready, McKay, and I'll be super excited to see how this turns out for us.
I will be texting you if that turns out.
In the meantime, we are answering local real estate questions. If you need anything, go to kenmoreteam.com, shoot us a message. And we actually have one more show before the Super Bowl. So if something drastically changes, I'll call you and let you know to change your bet. But
yes,
for now, we'll be right back here next week.